Good evening and welcome back to 13 Horror Nights. It's episode 5 and tonight's movie is Hereditary. I am stoked to watch this movie. I predict that this is going to be one of the highlights of this entire month. The thing that I hear from all ends is that this movie is actually legitimately scary, and I have not been scared by a movie in a long time, so we'll see, but I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. From what I can tell from the trailer, there's this family and, the grandmother, who I think is, the head of the entire family, dies, and something starts happening to the kids in the family. They're being hunted or haunted by something that was passed down to them from their grandmother, and there aren't a lot of details, but it just shows you a lot of images, and I keep hearing, it also shows a bunch of, reviews of the movies, this is, the new Exorcist, completely bone-chilling, terrifying. I believe that this movie started out as an indie production with the director Ari Aster, and I'm pretty sure that the actress who plays the grandmother is not credited, which is something you don't really see that often, but apparently this was released in theaters after being a smash hit at Sundance, and it became the studio's highest grossing film ever. Just from all sides, this seems like this movie is going to be very good. I also noticed that it's one of the longest movies I'm watching this month. It's over 2 hours. It's not the longest, but it's the second longest. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that, but I think that might be a good sign considering the fact that The Conjuring 2, a 10 out of 10 movie from the first 31 Horror Nights, was the longest one out of all of them. I think that this movie is going to be good. I hope I'm not proven wrong, and I don't think I will. I guess I'll just find out, and I'll see you guys once I'm done watching. Alright, I have finished watching Hereditary, and they were not exaggerating. I can safely say that Hereditary is the scariest movie I've ever seen. However, when it comes to horror movies, being scary is not the end-all be-all, and even though this was masterfully made as a horror movie, I think I'm still just gonna give it a 9 out of 10. I would only give a 10 out of 10 to a movie where I couldn't think of anything they could have done that would have made it better, and I do think there were things they could have done to make Hereditary better, but that's not taking away from how expertly made this film is. A lot of people mock and belittle modern horror movies, saying that they just rely on jump scares and CGI and shock value. This movie knows how to be scary, actually scary. This is the slow, creeping, atmospheric terror for a lot of the movie, and throughout the entire thing, the entire 2-hour runtime, I could only think of one jump scare in the entire thing, and that was near the end, and they built up to it very well. One of the scares that they show a lot in the trailer is that the daughter, named Charlie, is in her classroom, and then a bird flies into the window. In comparison, in Get Out, they had a similar scare with they were driving down the road and then a deer crashes into their windshield and bounces off. And that movie was out of nowhere, sudden, immediate, that's meant to be a jump scare. And this one, you see the bird flying up, so it's not startling when it hits the window. This movie does not go for the cheap shots when it comes to creating atmosphere. This movie is actually scary in the sense of it creates this building dread. It doesn't do any of the annoying jump scare tactics that a lot of modern horror movies are guilty of indulging in. When there is something in the background that you should be seeing that should be scaring you, it won't play a music sting. In fact, I have to say the score in this movie is very well done in the way that it rises and falls, but also doesn't overpower what's actually happening on the screen. In Hereditary, this family is... I really like the way this movie starts in the fact that it sort of examines what would happen when a not very popular family member dies. In this case, the grandmother. And you can tell that the daughter, she still sees her as family, but there's this disconnect. There's this estrangement between the two of them. And when she's trying to come up with things to say at the funeral, it's weird. And there's also just this tension between her and the son. There's the father, the mother, and the two kids. And the main two characters in the movie are the mother, named Annie, and the son, named Peter. Both of these roles are wonderfully acted, 10 out of 10, spectacular. The only thing I will say is that the actor that played Peter, Alex Wolff, was in his 20s when this movie was being made, and he looks like he's in his 20s. He looks too old to be playing the part that he's been given, but he does it very well nonetheless. And then we have Toni Collette as Annie, who absolutely steals the show. This is like Babadook level amazing acting from a female lead. This actress has quite the pedigree, and she just like completely takes the stage with this performance. This movie is a lot like The Babadook or The Haunting in the way that it's a psychological study of this one person, and you really get inside their mind and their head. And it's this weird battle between them, like, being the hero and, like, being complicit in what's happening or, like, wanting what's happening to happen to them. And it's very interesting, and it's very well acted, and it's very well done. I said in the last video that there's a difference between watching two people yell at each other and watching two people have an argument. And there's this one scene in this movie that is an absolute, like, shot through the heart moment of family members, like, really just bearing their souls and just saying every horrible thought they've ever had to each other. But the weird thing is that with, like, performance and writing this good, I kind of thought that this movie was going to go into a different direction than it ended up going. I thought that this was going to be a lot like The Conjuring 2 in the fact that it was also like a character story and a character drama as well as a horror movie, sort of like going into what it means to be a family and the way that people can't just keep coasting along and pretending things are going to get better. They need to be uncomfortable and they need to talk things out if they're going to like have a good relationship with each other. But that doesn't really happen. And honestly, I really wish they had gone that way. And this movie is not obligated to be like a touching family story. If you want to make a horror movie, make a horror movie. But the opportunity to make this something absolutely spectacular was there. Spectacular in the way that The Conjuring 2 was. But in this one, they decided to just focus on the horror, which I can respect, but I still feel like there could have been more to this. I really don't want to go that much into talking about the plot until the spoiler section, because if you see this movie, and I would recommend seeing this movie, it's not for the faint of heart, it's scary, but if you want to see this movie, and I would recommend it, you should go in knowing as little about it as possible. I would say that to conclude the spoiler-free review part of this video, if you're looking for a movie to actually scare you this Halloween, I can't think of anything better than Hereditary. From start to finish, this movie is a roller coaster of emotions and terror, and it's intense. But if you're looking for a horror movie that can, like, balance both just being a good movie in terms of character development and plot, as well as being scary, I have other movies I would recommend instead of Hereditary. The Conjuring 2, I think, does better at that. But, again, to each their own. But it's in the spoilers where this movie gets really interesting. The first big twist of this movie is the fact that the daughter, there's something weird about her, like, from the beginning. And, the thing is that after the bird hits the window, she like cuts off the bird's head with a pair of scissors, and they never really go into why or what. And then there's this very sudden thing where they establish that she's like allergic to nuts, like she will die if she eats nuts. And the mother, Annie, makes Peter take her to like a high school party that obviously she doesn't fit into. There's nobody else her age. There's nobody else who would want to be interested in interacting with her. And Peter like tells her to sit tight, eat some cake, he's going to go smoke some weed, and you see them chopping up nuts for the cake. So obviously she eats it and she starts going into shock. Her throat starts closing up. And he's desperately driving as fast as he can to get her to the hospital because yeah, like obviously they're not super close, but they're still family, and he's still very worried about her and wants to help her. And then there's a deer carcass in the road. And right before that, she, like, opens up the window and sticks her head out to get some air because she can't breathe. He swerves and everything aligns, and they run into a pole, and literally her head is ripped off. And he's so in shock of it that he doesn't even tell them about it. He just drives home. And then the mother, when she goes out and gets to the car, she sees the dead body of her daughter. And you really get to see the contrast between the two different funerals because it was very, like, mellow and subdued and don't really know what to think with the funeral of the grandmother. But with the funeral of Charlie, she is just absolutely shattered. She's just crying her eyes out and she's saying that she wants to die. And then we get the scene of the dinner scene where, like, they both, Peter and Annie, they're kind of, like, picking a fight with each other. Like, oh, you got something on your mind? It was like, why would I say? You're just gonna sneer at me. And then she just, like, stands up and starts bearing her soul, saying, like, and one thing I like about this is that this isn't, like, irrational yelling and just just, I'm so distraught. This is like her actually talking about what she's feeling. And there's still self-awareness to it. She doesn't blame him for what happened, even though he was the one who let her go eat nuts. He was the one who was driving the car, and he was the one who swerved and made them hit the pole. And she said, I understand that was an accident, and I understand that you're hurting, but because you are not willing to admit that you had some hand in this, I can't address this, and I can't come to forgive you. And like I said before, this movie really does like show what happens when a family loses communication with each other. They start drifting apart and seeing it as them against everybody else. When a good family dynamic, they work together. And a lot of this is so heartbreaking because this isn't a totally broken family. They still love each other and they still care about each other, but there are these disconnects formed between them. And with this calamity coming along, they're not equipped to face it together. And again, after that scene of the dinner, I was thinking, okay, if this sort of goes in the direction of like The Conjuring 2, where this becomes like, in addition to a horror movie, also like a character study and like talking about like the power of family and just communication and coming together in like a really good way, this could be like 11 out of 10, an amazing movie, but they don't really do that. More paranormal activity starts happening to mostly Annie and Peter, and eventually she discovers that it's actually a lot like what happened in the Paranormal Activity series. The grandmother like did something to receive like riches and glory and stuff from a cult. And in return, there's like this demon, and I think it was like Paimon, that is going to possess Peter's body. And in a way, this kind of made me think of Kill List, a movie that I absolutely hated, in the fact that it's that same sort of like everything was a conspiracy and everything was building up to one specific thing. But in this movie, it makes a lot more sense and it's done well, and I don't hate every single character. The way they were building it up, I was genuinely expecting Annie to find some way to save her son. And they were going to like work through this and move forward together, but that doesn't happen. This is one of the horror movies where the villain wins. The demons win. The father dies, then the mother dies, and then Peter goes out into like the treehouse that they had outside, and there's a bunch of naked people all bowing. A lot of them are headless, and he gets possessed by the demon. It's kind of funny when you look at this, because I was saying with movies like Bird Box and Get Out was that it seems like they were trying to be not horror movies. They were trying to be like social dramas or stuff like that. But in this one, it's like it was really, really good at being a horror movie, but it also had the opportunity to be also like a really good drama and a really good character study. And in this one, they didn't go down that route. In pretty much all respects, looking at it in the context of being a horror movie, Hereditary is absolutely astounding. It has the clever scares of something like Hell House LLC. It has the really good psychological study of something like The Babadook or The Haunting. And it's just edited really well, and it has such good build-up and such good effects and such good scares. But it's not like a good movie in the way something like The Conjuring 2 was. Does that make it bad? No, Hereditary was spectacular. And I'm not saying that it needed to be all this and more. For what it is, it's done pretty much perfectly, but I think that it had potential that it didn't really fulfill. However, after the massive success of Hereditary, the director, Ari Aster, went on to direct another movie, and I'm sure he's going to direct more down the road. And I'm excited to see those, because this director shows a lot of promise. He's also the one who wrote it, so yeah, I am looking forward to seeing more of this guy's work. And with that, I think I've said my piece on Hereditary. I'll see you guys tomorrow.